I know it's warm, but our mission is to keep you away from the bar for at least another 20 minutes. And the person with the unenviable job of doing that, please give a warm welcome to my friend, good and long-term friend from the Netherlands, Bas van der Hatterd. Bas, over to you.
Thank you, thank
Did
you.
I do better than Chad?
It's close enough, close enough. As I said, I don't ever get annoyed anymore with Brits or Americans not being able to pronounce my last name. Actually, there's enough Dutchmen who don't do it right. So, very short, my name is Bas van der Hatterd. I recently started a new startup called the TA Audit Institute, where we audit big corporates on bias, right now only in the Netherlands, because bias is a very regional and national thing, the differences between them, I'll get into that later. I've always also done a lot of independent consultancy work for among others, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, selecting on honesty. I run the biggest recruitment event in the Netherlands, and I do so many other things, which is just completely unnecessary to talk about because this is about the content. So what is bias? Bias is an inclination or prejudice against a person or a group considered to be unfair. And there's also cognitive biases where we see a pattern which is basically not there. Now, labor market discrimination is basically unchecked bias. We're human, hence we're biased. Yet, what we as TA professionals need to do is get a process in check which gets rid of the bias in order to be able to give every candidate a fair chance. And I'm just going through the entire process now. Where could bias creep in and how could you do anything about that? So let's start with something very simple, and a writer of job ads just walked in. A vacancy text. And to be honest, there's a lot of bias. There can be a lot of bias in there, but we've got a technology solution. Seldom technology is a solution for anything. For getting bias out of job descriptions and vacancy ads and job ads, technology can just do the job, period. There are just a ton of good ones out there. Make sure that it does understand your language. Not everything is written in English. If you're a global TA lead, don't push your really good working tool that works perfect in English on all the other countries because it doesn't work that way. That's our bias. That's mainly an American bias, that everything they developed works for everybody. So just get a really good checker, works perfectly. One of the most interesting biases I found actually in job descriptions or job ads is the level of language bias. So in the Netherlands, we've actually have 5 different levels of Dutch, starting at A level, which is basically elementary school, and then going up to academic level Dutch. And if you're writing difficult words, which for somebody who finished college and is in TA isn't a difficult word, it might still repel a lot of people, and especially people for who Dutch was originally not their first language. So there are checkers who can actually say, this is what we call B1 level, that's what the government said. You know, everybody basically who finished high school should be able to read B1 level, and so that's the level we need to communicate at. Weirdly enough, I've worked for several governments and they have a really difficult time writing their job ads in B1 level. All right, bias in sourcing, and this is an amazing research, and I'm sorry, there's an insane amount of text on here. I usually only do pictures, but I want to share mainly all kinds of academic research done on bias globally. So why I love this research is because the Arbeid.Schweiz, which is basically the labor market help from the government for everybody who's unemployed, you know, the unemployment agency, gave all their data to academics. Anonymized, of course, but all their data. And they did amazing research on there. One of the things was it showed that if your contact details are requested by a recruiter, there's a 2.1% less chance for every time it was contacted that you were still unemployed 90 days later, which all of a sudden showed that the unemployment office works. You know, that's usually, at least in most countries where I come, everybody's like, yeah, that's crap. It tends to work. But also, they looked at the 5 most typical female occupations being the occupations which in Switzerland have the highest percentage of women in them, and looked, do men get approached for that, sourced for that? And women have a 6.7%, and they did the same for women in men jobs. And you see the difference that women have a 6.7% lesser chance of getting approached for a male job, but men have 12.6% less of a chance to get sourced for a female job. And a female job might be, for example, kindergarten nurse and stuff like that, which has like a 98% females in that. So that's on the female, but then they also looked at, and they, because they didn't have ethnicity, of course, in their profiles, but if you're working in Switzerland and you do speak Turkish, that's a sign that you might be of Turkish heritage and stuff like that. Weirdly enough, the Swiss even discriminate against the Germans. A little less than they discriminate against the rest of Western Europe. So the Dutch had like, I think, 6% less chance. But it turns out, and we're going to get back to this, that they have a weird hierarchy in, or weird compared to a lot of other countries, because they actually dislike Asians more than they dislike people from the Middle East and North Africa. And in most Western European countries, it's the other way around. So that's why I said it's really, really strange, bias is very local. You know, what do we look most against? Now, that's sourcing. And this is one of the most amazing researchers I've ever come across. And probably the best well-funded academic research in the history of academic labor market research, because what they did was they actually applied at all these jobs, mainly with resumes, sometimes with call-ins or stuff like that. But then when the two people got invited, they actually trained actors to give the same answers to the questions, and actually went through the entire process and saw who got hired. I mean, I can't imagine the number of really pissed off hiring managers this research produced as well. But so they were actually able to measure like where in the process is most of the bias. And it turned out 85%, or technically a little above it, it was actually 85.8% of all the bias is before a candidate is ever seen. We do so much bias-free interview training, yet we already selected all the minorities out when we do CV screening. There's so much effort in the further of the process, because it's easy to give people a training and to put the checkbox in, like, yeah, we had bias training, but almost everything is in CV selection. Well, the solution for this is what I'm doing with the TA Audit Institute, bias audits. Now, is everybody this bad? No. It actually turns out, this is Flemish research, Belgium, that the larger the organization, the less bias you have. Probably because your TA department is more professional. And they found out that for the doubling of size of an organization, their minorities get a 7.8% higher chance of being invited. And now if you're a not-for-profit, basically government, it halves. The discrimination halves. So the government, in Belgium at least, is way better than all their companies in processes. One might say, why don't we just copy their programs? But for some reason we always look down on government programs, which, to be fair, having worked for a lot of governments, I kind of do understand it a little bit, but for some reason their D&I stuff really, really works. So understand where you are in your organization. Now, there's another organization, this is American research, which is really interesting. They found in law firms that the more female partners there were, the less junior women got hired. The research is literally called checking the box. All right, we're a diverse organization because we have all these female partners, most senior level that you can get at a law firm. And they actually found that it also correlated with not having a D&I policy. which now with the new government almost nobody has, but when this research was done, it was quite normal to have a D&I policy. And if you have a D&I policy and you actually think about your process from an inclusion perspective, it turns out you actually have less bias, because nothing here says that these women were less capable, nothing says they had less good grades and stuff like that, and it's all junior, so the only thing you can go on is grades. But what they noticed was basically they just weren't getting anywhere. And also, not just in selection, also in promotion. They saw the pipeline, the more women in the top, the less women got through the pipeline, because they weren't proactively trying to get rid of bias. That's basically the story. We have to work on this, because we're human, we're biased, and men think of male qualities as higher, and for some weird reason, most females think of male qualities as higher as well. And weirdly enough, especially if you're bald, it actually turns out that if you're bald, your management capabilities increase by 20%. There's another research. I see somebody over there nodding like, I actually spoke to one guy who had literally shaved his head for a job interview after he was rejected like 7 times for a manager position, and the one time he shaved his head, he got it. Now, this is purely anecdotal, but he was like, yeah, I wanted to try that research so he literally, I got to tell you, it is dedication. Having had to go this way last year, because I still claim it's voluntary, but it's not. So you got to love his dedication, but so organizational differences. Now, like I said before, it's really interesting to see that every country has its own negative bias against certain groups. So in the Netherlands, if you're from the Middle East of North Africa, basically, if you're a Muslim, you're screwed. In Switzerland, much less so. Also, these percentages tell you something about the level of discrimination. I'm going off script here, but I think I'll have some time left. Does anybody know from, this is a meta-research done into all the discrimination researchers ever done, which country discriminates the most? Anybody? Yell. No? It's France. With a long way from the number 2, which is Sweden. Number 3, the Netherlands. The reason, in France, by the way, it's the only one which is actually where bias and labor market discrimination is going down, but that's because in the 1970s they were at 99.8% discrimination, so they couldn't go up anymore. So they're still the highest, but it's the only one. They found a research where literally none of the minority candidates were even invited. Sweden and the Netherlands, because we believe we're so inclusive and we believe, and we don't have any decent laws on it, and you can't tell anybody that he's discriminating, and then people get really angry. And I literally did this at a meeting once where one of the females in the team said something really smart, and people just kept on talking. And then 5 minutes later, I literally repeated her sentence, and then they were like, "Oh, that's an amazing idea, that will work." And she looked at me very quickly, and I was angry at first, and then I was like, that's literally what she said 5 minutes ago, and you completely ignored her. And then he was angry because I told him he had a gender bias, and he had 2 daughters, so how could he be gender biased? And we got into a fight like that. Anyway, that's why I don't do interim jobs anymore, and people don't want me long-term at that company. I tend to... Weirdly enough, in Belgium, oh sorry, you need to take your picture. In Belgium, the most discriminated group keeps on changing. It's between the people from the Balkans and people from the Middle East and North Africa. So it's not a set thing. This is another amazing research I recently came across. This is they won't say the company, but I'm pretty sure because it's a Dutch headquartered, global multinational. It's either a really big oil company with a Shell as a logo, or it's Unilever, one of the two. Don't know for sure, but one of the two. And they being anonymity, anonymity gave their data to, again, two academic researchers, Erasmus and Amsterdam, and they switched from CV screening from the line management to recruiting. But they didn't do it all at once. They did it country by country. And then they were able to look at country by country over a year. As soon as that switch is made, the only thing we have in our application process is, of course, your gender. So we can't look at ethnicity, but are more women going through the CV stage? Because TA should have better processes, have bias training, etc. And it turns out they were. And then when they got to the interview stage, more women were hired as well, all over the world. And they expected to see the most difference in bias in the countries who were more masculine, like, for example, Nigeria or the Middle East. No difference at all. Basically, hiring managers think men are more, based on resumes, have a higher opinion of men all around the world. And now this is one of the most amazing researches I've come across. It's actually older than I am, so we should know this by now. This is over 50-year-old American research. And what they did was just freakishly amazing. So at first they had a bunch of recruiters interview candidates, and they basically had them interview white candidates and people of color. And they just, on 6 measurable measurements, measured your physical interaction with the candidate. Like, how far are you sitting from the table? Are you looking a person in the eye? Are you making gestures? There's apparently a framework for a non-verbal interaction, and they literally measured physically the non-verbal interaction. And then they had those recruiters rate every candidate on basically what we'd call fit. Do you think this person is a nice person? Would you like to have him in their team, etc., etc.? And they saw that all the black candidates were very much lower rated on fit, but also treated differently. They were literally sitting 5 centimeters further from them, and things like that. So then they had a group of actors be the recruiter, and they only had white applicants, and they gave half the white applicants the white treatment, and half the white applicants the color treatment. And they had observers, recruiters observe. How good do you think this person would fit in the team? Is this a nice person? Is this person showing enthusiasm for the job, etc.? And it turns out that all the white applicants which got the black treatment started behaving also a little more distant and started being ranked at the exact same rate. So when it comes to bias, people behave based on how we treat them. And it's really difficult for us to treat everybody equally because we're human. But it influences the entire hiring decision. So I thought this was one of the most amazing. It's so old, and we know this. We know this. And we know this, and we talk about when we're educating our kids. Why does our teacher treat one kid different from the others? We actually know that giving them security and the feeling that they need to improve is the most important thing. Anyway. Also from actually, I think there are a couple of apps here, like MetaView, who can help you with this. The data from interview intelligence apps. Turns out, women get more questions during interviews. This is Silicon Valley data, I must admit, so it's a little bit of a masculine environment, but women get more interviews but less time to answer, or more questions during the same interview but less time to answer them. Men talk more when there's female candidates, and then say, she didn't say that much intelligent. No, you should have shut up, idiot. Women get different questions than men. Why do you think you're fit for this job? Gets asked, a woman gets asked that 3 times as much as a man. And of course, women can't complain about that because they don't know that the men don't get those questions. Um, Interestingly enough, female recruiters then start compensating by giving women more interview time than men, which might also be a bias again. I've actually recently came across one of those interview intelligence apps, and they literally have the, how do I translate this to Dutch? It basically verbal cohesence rating. So how much of the same words are you using as your candidate, as an interviewer? Because that's actually a sign of bias, because if we have the same speed and tone of speech, we kind of like that person more. So they actually have a bias risk indicator for somebody who speaks in the same manner as you as a recruiter. So it's basically it's telling you, all right, you've got a high risk of liking this person bias, or a high risk of really not liking this person bias, purely on the speed of which you talk and the tone of which you talk, and impartially the difficulty of the words that you use, which I kind of really like, that technology is helping us realize just how human we are, and then saying like, all right, did you really like this person? Or did you like this person because he or she talked like you? Now, why does this all matter? Because literally, the more diverse you are, the less chance you have of going bankrupt. And this is, again, unfortunately, they're tearing it all down, but this was one of the most amazing studies done at Harvard, which they probably won't ever be able to do again, but that's a different story. Harvard, in 2016, after the financial crisis, thought, wait, we did a discrimination study in 2004, where in this case, they literally did mainly walk-ins. So they didn't even put bias on from a name perspective. They literally had actors walk into and give their resume at the front desk for jobs. And they had white, Hispanic, and black actors. Just hand out the resume with the same name and see, who gets called back, etc., etc. Big discrimination. Spanish and white were too close to call, so they didn't see that much in there. But of course, there was a big discrimination against the people of color. And then the financial crisis hit, and we had an insane amount of companies going bankrupt. So they looked at, can we correlate? Because we've always said, you're more resilient if you're more diverse, right? But that was theory. That was logic, but theory. And they actually found that the companies that didn't discriminate went bankrupt in 17% of the cases, and the ones that did went bankrupt in 36% of the cases. So there's twice as much chance of going bankrupt with a non-diverse team. Now, of course, the researchers, being good academics, said there could be a different reason. Probably it might be that this company owner has the same thing, has the same mentality to his finances as he does to hiring, basically on the go, no structure, and so it might be the same root cause. But it's the only research we actually saw that the chance of going bankrupt doubles if you discriminate on the labor market. Now, there are many cognitive biases, which I haven't talked that much about, or these are as well cognitive biases, but you've got the availability heuristic, which means all the people, the people who applied are the only ones I can select from. And if you have a badly written vacancy text, that might impact it. You've got in-group favoritism. How do you feel about, well, this is England, how do you feel about Arsenal fans? How do you feel about Tottenham fans? How do you feel about Manchester United fans? That's either in-group or out-group. You've got authority bias, which is basically the people who changed their company names from 5 different IT companies to Google, Facebook, and Meta doing the same job all got invited because authority, like they never have a mishire. And the most interesting is priming. We tend to go with the first CV we see. And then we go from there. So that's why people who apply early usually get the most invites. But I recently was talking to one of the biggest global retailers, and he told me, and I wasn't allowed to ever name his name, he didn't tell me I couldn't tell the story. In France, their ATS, Workday, was not set on date of application, but on last name in sorting. And now in France, every person who works in their stores, their last name starts with an A, B, or C. They literally didn't get past the D. When they were hiring, literally everybody. So if you're in France and you're looking at the name tags and you see in a specific company all the names starting with A, B, or C, you know which company this was. That's priming bias, ladies and gentlemen, for you, and availability heuristic and what. To which I said, why don't you get rid of the CV? Because apparently nobody's looking at it anyway. Many different LLMs have been tested on bias. All of them have a preference, weirdly enough, for females. Even if so they created a female resume. They are, and the bias here is really weird, probably, because they ask an LLM to create resumes for a job and then ask them to rank them, and then it loved the female CV more. I actually find when I'm doing for my TA audit that it actually writes a different CV when I tell it to write it from a female perspective than from a male perspective. It's really interesting how the LLMs actually have a baked in. So in the Netherlands, we always start with why should you, basically a very short motivation on top of your. And with the men, it's always about what they did and how good they are. And with the women, it's always what they're aspiring to be. And that's how the LLMs think we write CVs, which is weird because we give them the exact same prompt, just saying this is my name and or this is my name in ginger. The interesting thing here is two things with the LLMs. First of all, if you ask them to rate them like 1 to 5, they will be biased. If you ask them to just give them a matching score, they're almost unbiased. So if you just ask them like how much does this match, everybody's in like the 95th percentile because of course you had them write the perfect resume to begin with. But if you ask them to like give me the top 5, it is biased against women. Claude, interestingly, from their own research, says as soon as you edit in the prompt, it's not allowed. You're not allowed to discriminate because we're doing labor market selection here. So you're not allowed to take gender, age, or ethnicity into, or religion, or the entire thing into. It stops discriminating. I'm still wondering why it's not a standard prompt within the LLM, but their own researchers found it out. That if you tell the LLM not to discriminate, it doesn't do it anymore. Still, don't use LLMs to look at your resumes, but that's. Now, I promised to talk about solutions. We've got about 2 minutes left. So, in CV selection, I say audits. Of course, I'm biased here because that's the company I'm starting, but just apply at your own hiring managers with 2 very similar resumes. Ask ChatGPT to create them the perfect resume. Throw them in your system and see if you both get invited. Just do it. That's literally what we're doing, but on scale. And of course, assessments. There's a lot of them out here. First degree assessments. If you do it right, they're less biased. But know what you're doing. Make sure they're fit for purpose, scientifically validated, etc. Replace or complement CVs with relevant assessment data. I actually did this at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because every hiring manager was like, no, I don't like assessments, I don't trust them, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, you can ignore everything. We're just going to put data here in the ATS next to the CV. This is the profile, and this is how much they match. And then, of course, it was government, so it was a pilot project, so the pilot stopped. And then all the hiring managers like, how the hell am I supposed to select now? You took away my selection data. Now, what the hell does a CV tell me? That was in a period of a year and a half. Have structured interviews and hiring scorecards. It's weird. We all know that the same questions in the same order asked, usually by the same person, is the way we should interview. Only 19% of all the Dutch companies do this. And score them immediately after the interview. Don't score them until everybody is interviewed. Only 16% do this. Now, I'm not expecting you to look at this, but this is actually how much validation and bias is in every type of assessment we have, which is interesting. If you look at the work sample, we expect that to be very neutral. It's actually one of the most biased ways to select somebody. Why? Because a work sample is dependent on have you done the work before. And we have a tendency to give, for the past decades, to give minorities less chance to do the work before. So a work sample has a lot of bias in there because it has a big learning curve. GMA, grade point average, that's also not that much. Job knowledge, also very predictable but very biased, again, because we give certain people the job knowledge. Structured interviews turn out to be one of the best predictors still. What about bias trainings? Well, it shows, it helps, but only if you change the process to remind them of the bias training every freaking step of the way. I'm not saying you shouldn't do bias training. I'm saying you can only do bias training if your process is aimed at also the scorecards. And just don't let another candidate be interviewed before the scorecard from the previous one is filled in. Don't show your scorecards to the other people in the hiring committee until the person has filled it in. So, to be human is to be biased, but to recruit is to keep your and your hiring manager's biases in check. Thank you all for your attention. And
thank you all. Do we have any questions for Baz? Anyone got any questions for Baz? Any burning issues? Data. Wolfgang, you have a question, or are you busy fanning? Busy fanning.
There's one, Bill.
Oh, we have a question. We got
all the way down there.
All the way at the back. Right, I'm coming. I'm just too hot to run. Oh, one more minute.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So the studies that you mentioned, there are some studies that are coming out now that have been invalidated, you know, some of McKinsey's ones around diversity and ROI, and you mentioned one about the people going bankrupt, less diverse. So what is your recommendation when we're looking at some of these studies to know the validity? Like, how do you know, how are you picking which ones are the right ones?
How am I picking the studies? Well, honestly, if they're invalidated, usually they're retracted, so you can't find them anymore. So basically, I just make sure that, and I'm a cheap ass, so basically I got somebody working at a university, and I just text him like, can you download this for me? Because with his university, he has universal access to all the studies. And if it's still on there, it's not retracted. Now, so that's basically, if it's peer-reviewed, if science says it's okay, I accept it. I do read through it and to see, like, do I believe, you know, what's the merit, what's the way they went about it. I personally, for example, prefer paired applications above mass applications, which is scientifically, either you apply with 2 of the same resumes on the same job, or you just mass apply to 10,000 jobs and you just assume that the numbers work out. I have a little less faith in that, even though science believes they're very valid. Yeah, I just, if they're not retracted, they're not there. But I do try to get the nuances in them, and I totally understand if you don't want to read academic papers that much. I throw them into Notebook LM and listen to them as a 20-minute podcast, to be honest. And only if the 20-minute podcast really reveals something cool, I'm going to dig deep in and try to find if it's even better.